Good evening, and welcome to News of the World. It's Friday, August 7th. Tonight we drift slowly across 28 countries, from Belgium to Chile. There's nothing you need to do, and nowhere you need to be. Settle in, and let the world turn. In Belgium these days, there's a quiet kind of decision that doesn't make much noise but tells you something about how a country sees its place in the world. The Belgian government has blocked a China-linked takeover of NHV Group, a helicopter operator based in Ostend on the country's North Sea coast. NHV flies helicopters for the offshore energy industry, moving crews to and from wind farms and oil and gas platforms out in the water. It's the kind of work that sounds specialized, and it is. But it sits at a crossroads of things countries care about: energy, maritime infrastructure, and who controls the companies that operate in that space. Belgium, like several European countries, has been paying closer attention to foreign investment in sectors it considers sensitive. The decision to block the acquisition wasn't loud or dramatic. It came through the kind of regulatory process that runs quietly, in meeting rooms, with paperwork and review periods. But the meaning behind it is clear enough. A small country guarding the tools of its own economy, making sure the hands that hold them are ones it recognizes. If you're still with me, you might picture that coastline flat, windswept, the kind of place where the sea and the sky feel close together. And somewhere out there, beyond the breakers, the turbines are turning and the helicopters keep flying. Saudi Arabia has been a country living between two pressures this week: the noise of escalation on its borders and the quiet work of building alliances against it. In the south, Houthi forces from Yemen have stepped up attacks, injuring 11 people, according to the Saudi-led coalition. Saudi officials have warned of a broader threat from Iran-backed groups, including Iraqi militias, potentially targeting ports and airports. It is the kind of news that can tighten the chest of any nation, the sense that trouble is edging closer to civilian infrastructure, to the places where ordinary life happens. But alongside that worry, something else is taking shape. Leaders from Turkey and Pakistan have been traveling to Saudi Arabia for talks with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif came amid the Gulf tensions, and Turkey's President Erdogan joined him. According to sources, the three countries are expected to sign a joint defense agreement, a signal that Saudi Arabia is not facing these questions alone, and that the map of cooperation in the region is shifting. It is worth remembering that these three countries share deep historical and religious ties, and that defense pacts between them carry weight far beyond the paper they are printed on. For people living in Saudi Arabia's southern towns, where the sound of drones and sirens has become more familiar than anyone would wish, the hope is always the same: that diplomacy moves faster than the next attack. If you're still with me, hold that thought for the people in those towns tonight. They are waiting, like anyone would, for the noise to stop and for the agreements on the table to mean something real. Suriname sits on the northern shoulder of South America, a small country whose story often travels quietly. This week it found itself in conversation with one of the world's largest. India's External Affairs Minister Jaishankar spoke of Suriname as part of a broader vision, what he called a partnership for progress, highlighting India's global role and its willingness to stand alongside smaller nations as they build. The details of what was discussed remain modest in the reporting, but the framing is worth sitting with. A country of roughly 600,000 people perched between Guyana and French Guiana, drawing the attention of a nation of more than 1 billion. It speaks to something changing in how the world arranges itself, and Suriname these days is not without reasons to be noticed. Along with Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana, it has been helping propel growth numbers across the Caribbean region. There is gold in its interior. Drilling results have surfaced with promising grades, and oil is gathering on the horizon, with neighboring Curaçao already positioning itself as a logistics hub for what may come. None of this arrives without complication. A Surinamese ambassador has also been calling for stronger regional action against human trafficking, a reminder that growth and vulnerability often walk side by side. But the note Jaishankar struck partnership, progress lands gently here. Suriname has long been a place where cultures meet, indigenous, African, Indian, Dutch, Javanese, Chinese, all woven into the fabric of daily life. A conversation about cooperation, then, does not feel foreign. It feels like something this country has been practicing for a very long time. St. Lucia has launched something small and deliberate for its newest citizens. Families with newborns can now receive a grant of 1,000 Eastern Caribbean dollars, roughly $370 through a new program. The government is calling the Newborn Grant. It's a modest sum, the kind that won't transform a household's fortunes, but that's not really the point. The point, it seems, is the gesture itself. A country saying, at the very start of a child's life, we see you, we're here. For a small island nation of about 18 million people across the whole Caribbean, every birth carries a particular weight. Communities are close, families know each other. A new arrival ripples outward. And in a place where the economy leans on tourism and agriculture, where storms and global prices can shift things quickly, a little certainty at the beginning matters. The grant goes to eligible families, which suggests it's targeted where it's needed most, though the details are still settling. What's clear is the instinct behind it, that the earliest days deserve some support, some recognition. If you're still with me, picture the maternity wards in Castries or the smaller clinics up in the hills where this news arrives quietly. A nurse mentions it to a new mother. A form gets filled out. Somewhere, a family takes a breath and begins again, and the island, in its own small way, keeps its promise to the next one arriving. Mozambique has lost a quiet giant of its church. Cardinal Alexandre dos Santos Langa has died at the age of 98, a man who lived through nearly all of the country's modern story and who, at the height of its long civil war, served as a bishop. It is hard to overstate what that meant. The war years were brutal, and the church was one of the few institutions that could move between sides, carry messages, shelter the frightened. Cardinal Langa became known not for grand political gestures, but for something simpler and harder. He proclaimed peace. The Pope remembered him in those words this week, and for many Mozambicans, that phrase will have needed no explanation. He was only the second native-born cardinal in the country's history, a detail that carries its own weight. For a long time, leadership in the African church came from elsewhere. His rise was a sign that the church in Mozambique had grown its own roots deep enough to stand on. 98 years is a long life by any measure. He saw Mozambique before independence, through war, through the fragile agreements that followed, and into the decades of rebuilding. If you're still with me, consider what it means to carry that kind of memory, to have been present for so much grief and still be remembered first for peace. Tonight, in churches across Mozambique, his name will be spoken softly, and the country he served will pause as it does and keep going. Maldives is preparing to host a major hospitality trade expo, a gathering that reflects just how much the country's tourism sector keeps expanding. For a nation made up of scattered islands in the Indian Ocean, tourism isn't just an industry, it's the heartbeat of the economy. And this expo brings hoteliers, suppliers, and travel professionals together in one place to talk about what comes next. The signs of that growth are quietly everywhere. A new dedicated freighter route has launched, connecting the Maldives more directly to regional cargo networks, which means goods and supplies moving more reliably to the resorts that dot the atolls. At one resort, a hospitality group has just planted its 10,000th coral fragment, a slow, patient effort to repair reef ecosystems that the country depends on for both protection and beauty. Elsewhere, resorts are introducing weekly wellness experiences designed to help guests reconnect with nature and with each other. And at Conrad Maldives' Rungali Island, a new commercial director has been named, the kind of quiet personnel shift that signals how competitive and international the hospitality scene here has become. None of these stories on their own would make headlines far away. But together they paint a picture of a country that is busy, careful, and growing, always trying to balance the demands of a booming travel industry against the fragility of the islands themselves. If you're still with me, hold that image for a moment. Turquoise water, patient hands planting coral, and an expo hall filling with people who believe in the future of these islands. Angola has been working to resolve a fuel crisis that traces back to the way the country subsidizes petroleum for its people. The details are still emerging, but the outlines are clear enough. When the systems that keep fuel affordable come under strain, the effects ripple outward to the pumps, to the markets, to the minibuses that carry people to work. Angola is a country that knows oil intimately. It is one of Africa's largest producers, and its national oil company, Sonangol, has been testing new reservoirs offshore, including a promising appraisal well called Katambi 2, which has shown good quality gas. So the resource is there. The challenge is closer to home, in the delicate machinery of pricing and supply, in making sure what comes out of the ground reaches people at a cost they can manage. Fuel crises are not abstract things. They mean longer queues, harder mornings, a quiet pressure on households that are already stretching. The government has signaled it is working on a resolution, and the national broadcaster has been carrying that message. For now, the country waits and adjusts, the way people do when something essential becomes uncertain, carefully, and with the patience that comes from having been here before. If you're still with me, we'll let Angola rest there for tonight and move on. Australia has taken the messaging platform Telegram to court. The charge is straightforward, at least in its framing, that Telegram failed to remove what the Australian government calls terrorist content from its service. The details of the case are still emerging, but the shape of the dispute is one many countries have been wrestling with. A platform hosts material. A government says that material crosses a line. The platform does not act or does not act quickly enough, and then the question becomes not just about what was posted, but about who is responsible for it once it's there. Australia has been building toward this moment for some time. Its online safety laws are among the more assertive in the world, giving regulators powers to demand takedowns and to penalize companies that don't comply. Telegram, for its part, has long positioned itself as a platform with lighter moderation, and that stance has brought it into tension with governments in several places, not only here. What makes this story worth carrying tonight is not the drama of the courtroom, which will unfold in its own time. It's the quieter tension underneath, between the idea that information should flow freely and the conviction that some things simply should not be amplified. Australia is asking that question in a legal register now, and whatever the outcome, the conversation it joins is far from settled. If you're still with me, we'll move on. Greece first put Mount Olympus forward for World Heritage status in 2014, and now, 12 years later, UNESCO has finally said yes. It's a long wait for a mountain that has been famous for considerably longer than that. This is the mythological home of Zeus and the 12 gods of the ancient Greek world, a peak that ancient people looked up at and filled with meaning. What the UNESCO designation recognizes is not just mythology, of course. The mountain is a real place. Steep, forested, home to plant and animal species found nowhere else. The status means it carries a kind of international agreement to protect what makes it significant. 12 years is a long time for a committee to deliberate, But mountains, as a rule, are patient, and Olympus has been waiting far longer than 12 years for anything. If you picture it, you might picture the summit in cloud, which is how the ancients imagined it, the gods above the weather, above the noise of the human world. The World Heritage designation doesn't change the stone or the soil, it just means more eyes are watching now, more hands committed to keeping it as it is. A mountain that was sacred long before there were committees given a new kind of recognition. The cloud still sits on the summit. The gods, if they're there, may not have noticed. Malta sits alone in the middle of the Mediterranean, and that loneliness has always been part of its story. These days we think of it as a place you can fly to in an hour or two, a small island republic with a harbor full of life. But long before there were harbors or runways or even the idea of a sail, someone looked out across that open water and decided to go. Archaeologists now believe that Stone Age hunters from mainland Europe made sea voyages to Malta, more than 50 miles of open sea between them and that small dot of limestone on the horizon. This was thousands of years before any evidence of sails, so whoever made that crossing did it with muscle and nerve, likely paddling something simple across water that doesn't always forgive. We don't know their names, we don't know what they were looking for, game perhaps, or just the next island over the edge of the world. What we know is that they arrived and they stayed, and Malta's long human story began with that act of courage or desperation or curiosity. It's a strange thing to hold in mind when you picture the place now, the jazz festivals in Valletta, the guitar concerts in old squares, the steady hum of a modern island. Underneath all of that lies something older and quieter, an arrival. A first footprint on a shore that had been empty, reached by people who had no map and no certainty, only the water ahead and the will to cross it. If you're still with me, let that sit for a moment. Argentina has always lived with the rhythm of economic weather, the booms that arrive like a sudden summer, the long winters that follow. These days, the forecasters are adjusting their expectations once again. Analysts watching the country have trimmed their growth projections for 2026, pulling the numbers down a little from what they'd hoped just a short while ago. At the same time, there's a quieter note beneath the headline. The inflation outlook has dipped too. Not a dramatic fall, not a victory declared, just a slight easing, the way a wind sometimes loses its edge before you notice it's gone. It's a country holding several tensions at once. There have been large protests over a property reform bill that has drawn people into the streets. Diplomatic ties with Brazil have frayed a little, though. Argentina has chosen not to retaliate, and somewhere in the middle of all this, the government in Buenos Aires is balancing relationships with both Washington and Beijing, extending a major currency swap arrangement with China, even as pressure builds from the United States. Through all of it, Argentines recently marked a day to commemorate a World Cup win over England, a national memory wrapped in football, in pride, in something lighter than economics. Maybe that's the thing about Argentina. The numbers move, the forecasts shift, the pressures gather and release. But the life of the place, the street corners, the stadiums, the long conversations over coffee, keeps its own steady beat. If you're still with me, that's where we'll leave Argentina tonight, sitting with that small dip in inflation and the hope it might quietly hold. Estonia, that small Baltic nation on the eastern edge of the Baltic Sea, has quietly become the country that foreigners find easiest to settle in, at least according to a new ranking that placed it ahead of every other country in the world. Now, we don't have the full details of the survey, so I can't tell you exactly what tipped the scales. But it's not hard to imagine what draws people. Estonia has spent the last couple of decades building something quite deliberate, a digital society where government services happen online, where starting a business can take minutes rather than months. and where the long, dark winters are met with saunas, warm cafes, and a kind of national coziness that outsiders seem to find surprisingly welcoming. There's a paradox here, of course. Estonians are often described as reserved, not a people who greet strangers on the street, but perhaps that's part of it. The welcome isn't loud, it's structural. It's in the systems that make life work. If you're still with me, you might wonder what a ranking like this means for a country of 1.33 million people. It means Estonia is paying attention to who comes and making it easier for them to stay. In a region where security concerns are never far from the surface, with American troops arriving this summer and drones on the defense shopping list, there's something steadying about a country that also invests in being a place people choose, not because they have to be there, because they want to be. And on a quiet night, that feels like its own kind of strength. Türkiye sits at a crossroads tonight, looking east with a steady and worried gaze. The country has warned of the risk of regional spillover from the tensions between Iran and the United States, and it has called for renewed negotiations between the two sides. It is the kind of message that carries weight when it comes from Ankara. Türkiye shares borders with Iran and Iraq, and it has spent years absorbing the pressures that ripple outward from every crisis in the wider neighborhood. The call for dialogue is not new, but it comes at a moment when the margins feel thin. Officials in Ankara have spoken about the need for firm global action against Israeli violence, and Türkiye's envoy has condemned a deadly bombing in Damascus, reaffirming support for Syria. Taken together, these statements sketch a country trying to hold the line in a region where the lines keep shifting. There is also quieter work underway. Türkiye has been deepening cooperation with Iraq, and its Security Council has been reviewing the next phase of what it calls a terror-free Türkiye process. None of this makes the headlines that travel fastest, but it shapes the ground beneath them. If you are still with me, think of Türkiye as a country leaning into a difficult wind, asking others to talk before the wind turns into something harder to stand against. The night is long, and the region is watching. Bahrain has been quietly reshaping how it wants the world to see it. This week, the small island nation in the Persian Gulf joined a global intellectual property agreement, a step meant to signal that it takes ideas seriously and that it wants the people who create them to feel at home there. It's a practical move as much as a symbolic one. Bahrain has been working to attract investment that's built on innovation rather than on extraction, the kind of investment that follows talent, follows patents, follows the quiet assurance that a good idea will be protected. For a country with roughly 1.5 million people sitting at the crossroads of the Gulf, that means thinking carefully about what it offers. Joining an international IP framework tells inventors and companies that the rules here line up with the rules elsewhere, that a patent filed in Bahrain holds weight, that creative work has standing. It's not the loudest story from the region these days. Bahrain's king has also been traveling, holding talks in Egypt on regional issues, and Qatar Airways has resumed flights to Manama after a long pause. But underneath the diplomacy and the returning flight paths, there's this steadier current, a country trying to build a future around knowledge and the people who carry it. And if you're still with me, that feels like a worthier thing to carry into the night, a small place making a quiet bet on ideas. Costa Rica sits between two oceans, and for a small country, it has always done a quiet, steady business with its neighbors. This week, its government reached toward Panama with a proposal, a two-part plan aimed at easing a trade bloc that has been weighing on the movement of goods between the two countries. The details are still coming into view, but the shape of the offer is clear enough. Costa Rica wants to talk, and it wants to keep the conversation moving. Trade disputes between neighboring countries can settle into stubbornness if left alone. A border that should be a bridge can start to feel like a wall. So when one side comes forward with a structured offer, not a single demand, but a plan with two parts, it is a sign that someone is thinking about the long road, not just the next headline. Panama has not yet responded in full. Diplomacy, especially between trading partners who share a region, tends to move at its own unhurried pace. There will be meetings and counter-proposals and quiet conversations in rooms far from any camera. What matters is that the first step has been taken. Costa Rica has put something on the table, and in a part of the world where so much commerce travels by road, that gesture carries weight. If you're still with me, hold that image for a moment. 2 countries, 1 offer, and the patient work of finding common ground. Antigua and Barbuda has been quietly making a case to Washington these days, asking the United States to reconsider visa restrictions that are affecting its citizens. The government has reached out to U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, urging a review of measures that have made it harder for Antiguans and Barbudans to travel to America. For a nation of fewer than 100,000 people, spread across 2 islands in the Eastern Caribbean, the ability to move freely matters in ways both large and small: family visits, business trips, medical appointments, students heading off to university. When that movement narrows, it's felt in ordinary households, not just in government offices. The request is diplomatic in tone, a neighbor asking another neighbor to take another look. There's no demand, no grand gesture, just a steady formal appeal to reconsider. And it comes at a time when Antigua and Barbuda is otherwise looking outward with confidence. The islands are projecting a strong winter tourism season, even with changes to JetBlue's flight schedule, and there's talk of continued growth in visitor arrivals. So the visa question sits alongside a larger story of a small country trying to keep its doors open to the world while hoping the world keeps its doors open in return. If you're still with me, hold that thought, a small nation making a polite, persistent request and waiting to see whether anyone is listening. In Slovakia, press freedom groups are watching the country's public broadcaster with growing unease. The organization Reporters Without Borders, together with partner groups, says it sees cracks forming in the independent oversight that keeps the broadcaster answerable to its audience rather than to whoever happens to hold power. The concern is straightforward. A public broadcaster needs a buffer, a layer of people whose job is to protect its independence, not to steer it. When that buffer weakens, the worry is that journalism starts answering to politics instead of to the public it serves. Slovakia has been here before in spirit, if not in exact detail. The country sits in a region where media independence has been tested from multiple directions, and where the line between government interest and editorial independence is sometimes thinner than anyone would like. What gives the concern weight is that these are early warnings, not after-the-fact reports of damage done. The oversight bodies exist. The question is whether they still function the way they were designed to, whether the people appointed to them are there to guard the broadcaster's independence or to quietly narrow it. For ordinary viewers in Slovakia, the stakes are quiet but real. A public broadcaster is one of the few places left where the news is meant to arrive without an owner's agenda attached. When that promise wobbles, people notice, sometimes in what gets covered, more often in what doesn't, and so the watching continues with the hope that the cracks are noticed early enough to matter. Cape Verde is an island nation in the Atlantic, 10 islands where the sea has always shaped how people live. These days, that relationship is turning uneasy. Sand is being taken illegally from the coastline to feed a construction industry that needs building material, and the shore is wearing away because of it. It's the kind of problem that doesn't announce itself in one dramatic moment. It happens slowly, tide by tide, truckload by truckload. Someone needs sand for a wall, for a foundation, for a growing town. The beach gives it up, and then the beach is a little less beach. France 24 reported on the illegal extractions, and the details are sparse, but the shape of the story is familiar. A growing place pulls materials from wherever it can find them, and the land itself starts to thin. For Cape Verdeans, the sea is never far. It's the first thing many people see in the morning, and the last thing they hear at night. To watch the coastline erode is to watch something foundational slip, not just scenery, but the ground a community stands on. The country has known harder trials than this. Drought, emigration, isolation. Cape Verde has carried all of it, but this is a quieter kind of loss. It's the kind where you look up one day and the place you knew is a little narrower than it was, and you wonder how much more it can give before it starts to give way. In the Netherlands, the land and the water have always been in conversation. For centuries, the Dutch have held back the sea with dikes, those long earthen walls that keep the low country dry and livable. It's one of the great engineering relationships in the world, patient and persistent. But these days, that relationship is being tested in a way people here didn't quite expect. The threat isn't only from rising seas or storm surges, it's from heat. Dry, hot summers are settling over the region, and they're doing something quietly destructive to the dikes themselves. When the earth bakes for long stretches, it cracks and pulls apart. Clay dries and shrinks. The very material that holds the water back begins to weaken from the inside. It's a slow kind of erosion, not dramatic in the way a flood is, but serious all the same. And the effects reach beyond the Netherlands. The same dry conditions are lowering water levels on rivers that carry goods between the Netherlands and Germany, disrupting trade routes that have flowed reliably for generations. Barges carry less when the water is shallow, and that ripples through supply chains most people never see. If you're still with me, you might appreciate what a strange thing this is. A country that spent 1,000 years worrying about too much water now has to worry about too little of it, in the wrong seasons, in the wrong form. The Dutch are practical people. They'll study this and they'll adapt as they always have. But the story is still settling, and the summers are still getting warmer. Italy is warm these days in a way that asks something of everyone who lives there. A heat wave has settled across Europe, and in Italy it has pushed every major city onto red alert, the highest level of caution, meaning the heat isn't just uncomfortable, it's something to plan around. Rome, Milan, Naples, Florence, the familiar names on the map are all under the same blanket of hot, still air. Red alert, in practical terms, means the authorities are asking people to take care. Drink water, stay indoors during the worst hours, check on older neighbors, on anyone living alone. The kind of quiet, ordinary vigilance that heat waves always ask for. And Italy knows this rhythm. Summers here have been growing hotter, and the country has learned to move more slowly when the temperature climbs, to close shutters against the afternoon sun, to save the evening for walking, to treat the middle of the day as something to rest through rather than push through. What makes this moment stand out is the scale. It isn't one region or one coastline. It's every major city at once, sharing the same warning, the same stillness. If you're still with me, picture that. A whole country pausing in the shade, waiting for the air to move again. The heat will pass, as heat always does. But for now, Italy is taking care and asking its cities to do the same. Kenya has quietly done something that hasn't been done before in East Africa. It has launched the region's first investment fund designed to track the world's biggest artificial intelligence companies. Names like Microsoft and OpenAI, the firms driving the global AI conversation. For a country more often talked about for its safaris or its long-distance runners, this is a different kind of arrival. It says that Nairobi isn't content to watch the technology revolution from far away. It wants its own people to have a stake in it. The idea is straightforward enough. Ordinary investors in Kenya and across the region can put their money into a fund that follows the performance of the major global tech giants. It connects a savings culture here to the companies shaping how the world works, searches, and communicates. What makes it matter, beyond the mechanics, is the symbolism. East Africa has young populations, growing mobile money systems, and no shortage of entrepreneurial energy. But access to the biggest technology firms has usually meant looking outward through channels that felt distant or out of reach. This fund narrows that distance, at least a little. It's too early to say how it will perform or how widely it will be embraced. Markets are unpredictable, and new financial products always carry their own quiet risks. But if you're still with me, consider what it represents: a country deciding that the future being built elsewhere shouldn't pass it by without a seat at the table. Tonight, in Nairobi and beyond, that seat is being set. Mongolia sits down each year with the International Monetary Fund for what's called an Article 5 consultation, a kind of annual checkup, a careful conversation about where the economy stands and what pressures are building. Those talks have now wrapped up for this cycle, and while the details are still settling into the public record, the fact that they've concluded quietly is itself a kind of news. It means the conversation happened, the books were opened, and the two sides reached the end of the table without alarm. Mongolia's economy has always moved with a particular rhythm, tied to mining, to coal and copper, to the appetite of neighbors near and far. When commodity prices rise, Ulaanbaatar breathes a little easier. When they fall, the whole country feels it, from the ministries down to the herders who buy fuel to move across the steppe. And fuel has been on people's minds lately, not only because of supply, but because demand itself has shifted in ways that are harder to fix with a single policy. So this IMF conversation matters, even if it doesn't make loud headlines. It's the kind of steady, behind-the-scenes work that helps a country plan for the next winter, the next quarter, the next stretch of road. If you're still with me, hold that image for a moment. A country taking stock of itself, patiently, before the cold settles in fully. Somewhere in Ulaanbaatar tonight, someone is writing up the notes and the lamps are burning late. Singapore has been quietly rebuilding something that had gone quiet, its stock exchange. For years, the city's bourse struggled to attract new listings, overshadowed by bigger neighbors and faster-growing markets. But reforms have started to take hold, and the numbers tell a story of patient work paying off. Listings are up 3.5 times over recent periods, and more than $3 billion has been raised. That is not a boom in the flashy sense. It is a careful, deliberate recovery. Exchange revenue has risen 14%, which suggests the changes are not just bringing companies to the door, but keeping them inside the room. One of the more interesting moves is a dual listing bridge with Nasdaq, allowing companies to list in both markets. It is the kind of arrangement that makes sense for a place like Singapore, small in footprint, global in reach, always looking for ways to connect rather than compete head-on. If you're still with me, what strikes you about this is the temperament. Singapore does not panic when things slow down. It adjusts, refines, waits. The exchange could have chased trends or loosened rules to draw quick interest. Instead, it seems to have chosen the harder path, building structures that make listing here genuinely useful, not just convenient. And now, slowly, companies are coming back. Whether this becomes a lasting revival or a momentary breath of life, no one can say yet, but the lights are on again, and the door is open. Sudan has pyramids older than most countries have names. They stand at Meroe, sharp and narrow, lined up along the desert like a procession that began centuries ago and simply refused to stop. These days, two forces press against them. One is the sand. It gathers at the bases, climbs the walls, fills the chambers that archaeologists spent decades clearing. The desert has always moved here, but the pace feels different now. The dunes shifting faster, the wind carrying more, and the other force is war. Sudan's conflict has touched nearly everything, and Meroe is no exception. The site lies far from the worst fighting, but the war drains away the things that keep a place like this alive. The guards, the funding, the visitors who once came by the thousands. Conservation work has slowed or stopped. The pyramids don't ask for much. They've stood for 2,000 years in open desert, and they've survived worse than sand. But they depend on someone watching, someone sweeping the steps, noting a crack, turning a key in a gate. When you look at the photographs, you see the pyramids half swallowed, the sand lapping at their feet like a slow tide, and behind them, an empty horizon. There's something patient about it, and something lonely too, the sense of a treasure waiting for quieter days to come. Eswatini. The small landlocked kingdom between South Africa and Mozambique has launched a new solar project in the southern settlement of Nsoko. The investment is reported at around $200 million, Imalangani, the local currency, and the plan is to turn sunlight into electricity for a country that has long depended on power imported from its neighbors. There is something fitting about the location. Nsoko sits in Eswatini's dry lowveld, where the sun is generous and the land opens wide. A solar farm there will draw on the very thing the landscape already offers in abundance. Details are still limited, but the project is part of a broader effort to strengthen the kingdom's energy independence, to generate more of what it needs at home rather than buying it across the border. For a nation of just over 1 million people, a project of this size is meaningful. It is not only about megawatts or balance sheets. It is about a country looking at its own sky and deciding to put it to work. If you're still with me, picture that quiet stretch of lowveld, the panels going in row by row, catching light that has been falling there all along. Some changes arrive with fanfare, others arrive more gently, a field, some glass, and the slow turning of a kingdom toward its own future. North Macedonia is spending these dry weeks the way much of the Balkans is watching the sky, hoping for rain, and dealing with what the heat leaves behind. Wildfires have been burning across the country as Europe's drought presses harder into the region, and the flames are only part of what people are managing. Water contamination has become a worry too, tied to the same stretch of dry weather that has strained reservoirs and rivers. When water levels drop, the quality of what remains can suffer, and communities are left navigating both scarcity and safety at once. It's the kind of slow pressure that doesn't always make headlines far away, but shapes daily life close to home. Farmers watch their fields, towns keep an eye on supply. Fire crews work the hillsides where the brush has gone brittle, and ordinary people adjust, boiling water, checking on neighbors, measuring what's left in the cistern. Drought in this part of the world isn't new, but each year it seems to ask a little more. If you're still with me, hold this one gently. North Macedonia isn't in crisis so much as in a long, patient conversation with a changing climate, and the people there are answering it the way they always have, carefully together, one dry day at a time. Belize is a small country on the Caribbean coast of Central America, and these days some of its most consequential changes are happening quietly, out past the tourist coast. Over decades, Mennonite communities who first settled here in the late 1950s have built what reporters describe as a land-buying machine, acquiring large tracts of forest and converting them to farmland. The reporting from Mongabay frames it as a story of methodical expansion, communities known for discipline, mutual aid, and agricultural skill, steadily buying and clearing land, with significant consequences for the country's forests. It's not a simple story. The Mennonites have been part of Belize for generations now, and their farms feed much of the country: poultry, dairy, grain. They are woven into the national life. But the pace of land acquisition and forest conversion has drawn concern, and the reporting asks where the balance lies between productive settlement and the preservation of the tropical forests that make Belize what it is. It's a question a lot of countries face, But here it feels especially close to the bone, because Belize is small, and its forests, like its barrier reef, its Maya sites, its eco-lodges are bound up with how the country sees itself. The story doesn't end neatly. It sits between two things that both matter: the livelihoods of communities who have made this place home, and the forests that stood long before anyone arrived. Somewhere in that tension, Belize is still working out what it wants to protect and what it can afford to lose. In Chile these days, there's a political figure drawing attention for building influence from outside the usual centers of power. The headlines call this person an anti-establishment power broker, and the fact that two different publications in the Americas are watching suggests the story is still developing. Chile has been through a great deal of political change in recent years. A new constitution was debated, then set aside. Protests reshaped the national conversation. Trust in familiar institutions has been tested, and people have looked in new directions for leadership. Into that unsettled landscape comes someone whose path doesn't follow the old routes. We don't have the details yet, the name, the party, the specific promises, but the outline is familiar to anyone who watches democracies under strain. When established parties lose their footing, space opens. Someone steps into it. Sometimes that someone reshapes the system. Sometimes they simply remind the system that it had grown distant from the people it serves. Chileans will decide for themselves what this rising figure means. They've shown in recent years that they're willing to question what they're given and demand something better. If you're still with me, hold that thought. A country of 17 million people, working through change, one quiet political season at a time, and let the night settle where it will. And that's the world for tonight. Wherever you are, whatever tomorrow holds, rest easy. The world will keep turning slowly while you sleep, and we'll take another quiet trip around it tomorrow night. Good night.